G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we're talking with owner of Newcastle's very own Lizotte's restaurant, Brian Lizotte. Brian grew up in the United States in a musical family, but Brian also had a passion for food, and so did his Diploma in Catering and Hotel Management in 1984. After travelling Europe, honing in on his cooking skills, Brian had the opportunity to work in the kitchen of the famous Rhinoceros Studios in Sydney. He would cook for the likes of INXS and Midnight Oil while working at the studio. In 1989, he would form his own catering company, More Than a Morsel Catering. It would be a pioneer in the field of catering, as it would be the first to specialise in national musical tours. After More Than a Morsel, Brian would open his own restaurants. One of these restaurants, which he opened in 2009, would be Live and Cooking at Lizotte's Newcastle and Lambton. G'day Brian, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
How you doing, Jack? It's great to be with you, and thanks for asking me.
I'm doing great, Brian, and thanks for coming on the show. And look, I just want to start off at the beginning, Brian. You know, I've read you were born in Massachusetts, United States, in the early '60s. What was your first musical memory?
Well, my first musical memories have to be sort of growing up in a very small town called Little Compton in Rhode Island. 7 children. So it was a very small house that we all had our little places. But I always remember vivid music like Joni Mitchell and the Doobie Brothers and all of that era of music, of the Crosby, Stills and Nash. And a lot of this old stuff was always in my household. And all of my eldest sister in particular, who's about 10 years my senior, was definitely into all of that. And I was about 8 years old when we left America. So I suppose, being instilled at 8 years old with music already was pretty special. And
I've read too, Brian, that your dad, Henry, was a saxophonist. I'm guessing your family was pretty musical then.
It was. And my eldest sister was the guitarist in the family. And my dad had a special thing all the time where he wouldn't force us or put any amount of pressure on us to play an instrument, but something that he had, and a little special treat he would always do is he couldn't help himself. If there was an instrument that wasn't being used in the household, he would go to the music store, change it over and buy another different instrument and sit that in the house. So there was always an extra instrument to the amount of children that was in the house. And and we would just gravitate towards, picking something up. So I was quite young at that stage, so I wasn't probably playing an instrument just then at that stage. But all of my other brothers and sisters were. So, if the bass clarinet didn't get used, he'd swap it out to a sax or a guitar or whatever it was. So there was always music, and Dad used to play on the weekends. He would go and have a little play with his jazz band now and then, do some gigs. So we were always subjected to music at a young age.
Because you mentioned a few instruments there. I mean, what were the ones you grew up playing with?
Yeah, well, later on, when I arrived in Australia, we moved to Australia in 1970, and then lived in Albury in the East Coast for a couple of years, and then we travelled over to Perth. So most of my memories of really growing up at school come from Perth, because we spent a lot of my life in Perth. And so I don't know why, but I picked trombone, and so started playing trombone, and then went back to the United States with only 3 children back in 1974. After living in Australia for quite some time, 5 years, well, it was almost 5 years, my parents thought, we better go back to America. They just, they had this idea that they had to go back. And so we went back and hated it, ended up in Arizona. And I played in the school band in Arizona, and Mark learned the cello. I learned the trombone. And we, it just came up from there. And so, Mark went from cello to guitar, to bass guitar, my brother gave him. And so it all progressed from there, I guess. And schooling in America was very prominent with being able to learn an instrument. So I suppose that was a bonus for us, because it was much more readily available in the United States than in Australia. So we got back to Australia, and the music fraternity of a high school back in the 80s or the 70s was pretty small, and so you were a bit of an alien. So I like to play sport too, so I could fit in. Put it this way, because if you put in this camp, you're a muso, you're one of those. but it changed rapidly, and now to this day, thank God, we're in a society where if you're a musician or an artist, you're not an alien.
Yeah. And in saying that too, I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier that music you grew up with, like the Doobie Brothers, I think you mentioned, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Like, has that music stayed with you since then?
Oh God, yeah. We the Chicagos, the Doobie Brothers, the Blood, Sweat and Tears. All of that music is just so prominent and so strong. I love going to the Blues Fest and catching up with all those classics, because they really spawned the music of today, and they're still to this day. Those songs will live on forever. The Fleetwood Macs of the world and all of that style of even the West Coast rock music of that era is just so prominent. Steely Dan and all of that, it's carried on, and I still love that music.
Are you into the vinyl records at all, Brian? I know that that music originally came out on vinyl records. I mean, are you into vinyl records at all?
Oh, definitely. We always had, my dad had the most incredible collection, and now I think my younger brother Mark has taken over from that, and he's got a whole wall in his house that is just dedicated to vinyls, and we've all got record players again, but there was a huge surge of just getting rid of it all too, and now we're buying it all back. So yeah, I mean, the idea of an album cover and just the visual effect that it gave people, you're still never going to be able to replace that. And now it's funny that the only type of music that's being sold these days, instead of a CD, it's gone back to vinyls now for artists. So it's a very expensive sort of thing, but I think it's a treasure. People hold on to that album, and they remember an album through the album cover, and we're missing that a lot these days in the modern music and the modern record world.
Lizotte's, like in New Lambton, obviously blends the food and music like in a way which is so magical. And I just wanted to ask, like, how'd you get into, like, what way do you want to get into like the food industry, like the cooking industry? Yeah.
My mum was such a great home cook, and so I was always probably leaning towards the kitchen even more than the music side of things. I love listening to it, and I love sort of seeing all my brothers and sisters playing instruments and everything. But when I was younger, I was more focused on food. So I suppose it was just a natural progression to end up in high school one day not knowing what I wanted to do. I think I was going to be a carpenter or a cabinet maker or something like that. I wanted to leave high school at year 10, and my parents said, well, why don't you just stick around just do one more year, see if you can find try and finish high school at least. And so I did that, and then in year 11 I ended up seeing a hospitality, hotel and management diploma at one of the colleges that was just opening in the northern suburbs of Perth, and just the bell went off, I guess, and off I went, and with manned with my trombone and music love. I also ended up going into the hospitality industry. So that was a huge, bell went or light bulb went on. So, and I've never looked back since doing that diploma in hotel and catering.
And of course, I've read too, Brian, that after you finished that diploma, you travelled to the US and then to Europe, and I think you were doing some work there with that diploma. I mean, take me through that time.
Just dabbling in all aspects of hospitality. I mean, I was a bar manager, I was a chef, I did all sorts of different jobs just to get by. So it basically steadfasted me for setting me up for my own business. So after traveling and working, having 3 jobs in some places in Sydney, and before I ended up traveling, I just thought this is great. And I met my then brother's girlfriend, who was on tour with Jimmy Barnes doing some shows over in Europe, in England, in London. We had a good bit of a chat one night after the gig, and I said, well, what do you do? And she said, well, I've got this little catering little arm that she does at a recording studio back in Sydney. And I said, well, geez, I'm coming to Sydney. And she said, well, look me up, and then that's how that started. And we started a little business and named it More Than a Morsel Catering, and that's how we became what we did, and grew from there. After the first year and a half, 2 years, Jeppy had children, had her first child, and so and we parted ways, and I took the business to the next level. and the rest is kind of history. And then so that we were the only catering company in Australia to end up doing a national touring legs, and grew that from just a humble little recording studio gig that we had at the Rhinoceros Recording Studio. We ended up being just about every recording studio we ended up going into in Sydney, and we would drop off food and look after the acts when they were recording some of the most famous albums in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, what do you remember about Rhinoceros Studios there? I mean, it's a legendary studio in Australian history. Like, what do you remember of the studio itself?
Oh, it was a great space. It was, very, very majestic, and you'd walk in with big high ceilings, and it just had the best vibe. Obviously, there was several studios within the complex. And the funny part about it was that on the top floor of that actual building was ASIO.
Oh, right.
So it was quite funny that I was this rock and roll sort of, sex, drugs and rock and roll studio was downstairs, and then you had ASIO upstairs. So it was quite funny. But yeah, some of the most successful albums, like some of your INXS things, because INXS part owned the studio at the time. Jimmy Barnes' Two Fires, Wendy Matthews' Emigre, Ian Moss's Matchbook. We had In Midnight Oil's Blue Sky Mining was done there. So I was feeding some of the most prominent musicians in the country early on. We went on to feed INXS for 200 days out of a year, with all their between their video clips and their concerts and all the studio time that I did with them for that time. So you got to know them, and we used to take them on a journey, and we would go out. Jeff and I would race out to the to the market and ask them, give them a call in the studio, find out how many people we were cooking for number one. He said, very rarely would it be, oh yeah, it's just the band tonight and the sound engineer and the producer. It would be like, oh yeah, we're inviting some, friends and family and whatever. And some nights it would be up to 30 and 40 people that we'd be catering for a big dinner. And so we had a lot of good times, and yeah, I suppose bands travel on their stomachs, and it's really important that they love their food, and the cuisine destinations became quite a popular thing where we'd ask them where they'd like to go instead of what they wanted to eat. So we had a lot of fun in those days, and it sort of grew from the recording studios, of course, into the videos and then the concert scene came through in full force. That's where we ended up being sort of monopolizing all the promoters who were using us, and we were listening to what the bands wanted to eat.
I mean, you mentioned a lot about INXS. Do you remember the menu that you were cooking up for them?
Oh yeah, well, they were great foodies. They loved their Japanese, all internationally, because they'd done a little bit of travel, quite a bit of travel by those days. So they had a good standard of food, but it was the family style, sort of dining that really they enjoyed, and a lot of choice and the family meal style was really important to them. Some nights we would be waiting for a little bit of time till they finish doing a take. So it was like always a hurry up and wait situation. So you'd always had to be ready to go at any short notice. But yeah, by and large, they just love food in general. So it was a pleasure to cook for all those guys. When
you were in Rhinoceros Studios, you were invited into the actual recording process itself, and you got to hear some of those records firsthand. Am I right on that? Yeah.
Well, that was the other special thing. Once in a while you'd be the privy one to go and hear some of the songs before anybody else would know what they were, and so you'd be like, and night after night, you'd hear, things coming out of the studio, and so and they'd be, playing them over and over again. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly which songs I was privy to, but I know darn well that there had to have been some that I listened to well before they became worldwide hits. So it's that's a special thing too. I remember doing the album launch at Sony Studios for Silverchair. And that was a pretty special one. Speaking of Newcastle, I remember their first album was being played in the boardroom in the Sony boardroom, and I did a little Thai banquet for all the executives and things, and they whacked that album on, and it was like, okay, guys, this is going to be the next big thing, and sure enough, it certainly was, So I did a lot of those functions too for record company execs and in boardrooms and things like that. So it was an interesting time.
Of course, out of the work you did with the studio, the recording studio, you founded More Than a Morsel Catering in 1989. I mean, take me through that journey and like taking that from idea to reality.
As a younger, gun-ho, nothing bulletproof kind of age, where nothing, you just bit off more than you could chew, and then you chewed like crazy. And I always had that concept, and it was just, it grew from that to, the size of the catering company. We were always looking for a new base camp, so we went from the studio that got too big one time. And I remember a funny story about, Andrew Farris finding me in the tape room or the storeroom of the studio, prepping beef skewers for a young Einstein, or what was it? Yahoo Serious' new movie, where we got the catering for the cocktail party to launch that movie, and so we had to do the prep somewhere, and so we were trying to prep it in the studio, and he walked in on me and was like, "Oh, g'day, Brian." So we had to have a chat after that. It was like, okay, well, maybe the recording studio is getting too small now, and maybe we should be looking for another place. And so that was a bit of a shock, a funny story that went on and led us to finding another base camp.
It was pretty much a success straight away from what I can see. I mean, I think Frank Sinatra is one of your first, like on his Australian tour, was one of his first, your first clients. I mean, how do you get someone like Frank Sinatra, like pretty much straight off the bat?
Well, I was lucky with promoters and tour managers and things, and there was a very famous production manager called Swampy Jarvis. I remember him giving me one of my first ever gigs doing the Beach Boys, and he would always request our services. And so once we got to know those sort of promoters, and we bent over backwards, it was basically the band, looked after the band, and then the rest of it looks after itself. So our philosophy was always, to go the extra mile backstage, and if the artist was happy, then everything else just fit in. So it was a pretty simplistic philosophy, and still we have that today. It's like, look after the band, and the people will benefit because the band want to play there, and they want to play my rooms, and they get looked after, and they show it on stage, and they're not likely to trim their set and try and get out of there early because they're not enjoying where they're playing. So they always look forward to coming to my rooms, and hopefully that'll be the case. If I ever pass this beautiful business on to someone, it'll always be that way, hopefully.
Do you have any memories of that Sinatra tour? Did you get to interact with him at all?
So he was an old grump, back in those, that time. He really wasn't in his prime, and I think the promoters were just trying to get one more tour out of him, and when I catered for him, he was pretty frail. He was still drinking his Chivas Regal. He'd have a good scotch, and they had to help him get up onto the stage. And my mum, I got a chance to bring my mother, and my brother sat in the front row, and so those are memories that I'll never forget. And he signed a thing, and I think it was Mel Torme and Edie Gourmet were the support that night, so we got to meet them. And there was more idols of my mum's and dad's. They were just avid fans of the Sinatra era, and so it was kind of nice to be able to connect my parents before they passed, to be able to and even though I did feed him, it was only a tuna fish salad sandwich, and he always travelled with his Campbell's chicken and rice soup, so it mixed with Evian water and then put into Royal Dalton China. It was a weird era.
Interesting. For when you were catering for these like big rock and roll, well, not that Sinatra's probably rock and roll, but for these big stars. I mean, did you get to see a lot of the shows, or were you pretty much busy in the kitchen?
Our kitchen was a lot of the time part of the whole thing. So you'd be right in the middle of the dining room, and that would be half the dressing rooms was always the kitchen. So you used to have to turn around some of these older venues, and the Sydney Entertainment Centre was probably the most. We actually had a kitchen, whereas some of these other venues there was no kitchen. And the Hordern Pavilion days, in the early days of the Hordern Pavilion, there was a pink bathroom sink in a corner, and that was the kitchen. And you'd put your trestle tables around the kitchen, around the sink, and everything was a PowerPoint and a sink where you got some water, and that was your catering spot. So we had to turn it. We had to be good at it. And slowly but surely down the track, I brought down on my own back stainless steel catering sink down at the State Theatre, and that's probably still there today, I think, because there was no facility at all for a caterer to look after the band until those days where I started catering. So it was primitive times, but very fun times, and that we basically pioneered an industry that wasn't there to start off with.
I could imagine catering for like national tours that you were traveling a lot. How did all that work? Like, I'd imagine there was a lot of logistics involved in that.
Oh God, pre-advancing tours and things, and I never forget the day that I got the phone calls from the promoters. I think it was the first double tours that we did were Billy and Elton and Madonna or something. No, was it Madonna and U2? That's what it was. So they toured, I think it was at 91 or 92 when they first came, or something like that back in those days. And I got the phone call from one promoter saying, "Can you cater for Madonna?" And I said, on a national basis, I said, "Sure," to Michael Chugg from Frontier. And then about 2 days later, I think I got a phone call from another promoter, Michael Koppel. He was doing U2, and he said, "Brian," he said, "I want you to do the U2 tour." And I said, I put the phone down. I was like, God, what have I just said? I agreed to do both. And so we scrambled and had to double our team and double the road cases that we had, double the equipment. And I'll never forget having a small cafe in Glebe that we were operating the business out of. And I had to close for a couple of days to actually put all the equipment and the road cases inside the cafe and stop. And so, when we loaded out, one tour went one way and one tour went the other. And it was quite incredible. And I was pre-advancing one tour while someone else pre-advancing another, and you'd leave that town and I'd go to the next one and set up the kitchens. And when we were, it was in big stadiums back in those days. And again, the kitchen facility wasn't all that much. Sometimes it was a burger bar, and we had to make do.
I wanted to also bring up too the personal chef for the Beach Boys in on their 1992 National Australian Tour. I mean, the Beach Boys. Like, do you have any memories of them? I mean, great band, yeah.
Absolutely, it was one of my first private chef kind of scenarios where I got to go out and actually be in charge of physically looking after someone just by myself. It was an interesting thing where I was a coordinator for the rest of the catering, so I would coordinate with whoever caterer was in each city, and then I would go into their kitchens and look after the band and find out what time they wanted to eat, what they wanted to eat, and sort of go out and work with their head chef to get me some produce, and then I would cook up their meals. And they all had, back in those days, they all had separate dietary requirements, and they were a bit finicky, and there was another scenario where it was a dry tour, so they were trying to cut back and get everybody to be healthy and all that sort of thing. So I just remember trying to trim that back as well for them, calorie wise and all sorts of things, and no alcohol. But we were traveling with a road case cappuccino machine, and I remember vividly they would have shots of coffee before they went on stage at some of the gigs, and it was the coffee machine. We wheeled it right next to the stairs to go back to go onto the stage, and it was funny. We would have a few shots of sambuca or something like that to go in their coffee as well, just to give them a little bit of an extra kick. But yeah, there was good times with the Beach Boys. I remember flying my daughter. At the time, she was about 2.5. And I remember she was running up and down the aisle of the plane, and I actually bought them because my parents were living there at the time, and my sister. So I did have a babysitter when I got there. So I actually got to travel with my eldest daughter, who I've got a fabulous photo of her in my cookbook, and she's sitting on a road case, and the Beach Boys are on stage in Perth at an outside gig and down on the Swan River there. And it's good memories, and yes, I'll never look back. My eldest daughter went on to now be one of very, very sought after tour manager, production manager, and worked for everyone from Elton John for 10 years, and she's been in the Blues Festival production office now for almost 10 years as well, every year, and travelled the world with Elton John for years. So she's done Jeff Beck and Tom Jones, and she's been around the world, and I suppose subjecting her to the music industry all those years was all paid off, and she now has a family of her own and lives in Ireland. So it's a proud issue.
I've read in 1998 when you did the Billy Joel Elton John tour, I think at Face
to Face.
Yeah.
Great tour.
Because your daughter was the personal assistant for Elton John, so it must have been great that you were catering for that tour and got to see like your daughter at work with Elton John, and yeah.
Well, it was that back in those days she wasn't touring with him just yet, so I did all my catering for Elton before she did. So it was basically. I got those days, and then I met all of the same crew, because Elton's band hasn't changed for years and years. There's been a couple of, unfortunately, of deaths by the bass player that was with them for many, many years. He passed, but by and large, it's the same. Nigel Olsson, and all of the most of his band have been with him for years, and his crew as well. So all the same crew were still touring with him right till the last show, which is incredible. It's a 25, 30-year career for these guys who just travelled the world and only just recently turned the machine off. So it's and then she got to see the end of it, and I sort of started way back in the 80s with it. So it's a buzz.
And of course, on that Elton John Billy Joel tour, I read in an article that one of your favourite memories is that Billy used to come into the kitchen every night and stir the pot or something like that. Like, am I right? Yeah.
You have done your homework, Jack. I'm impressed. Yeah, that was probably one of the highlights. He was just very, very available for when they toured. Music, the food was a huge element, and dinner time with his crew and band, and the two outfits, Billy's and Elton's, were very close. They got along like a house on fire. They'd often be sort of a mixture of everybody in the dining room at any one time. They were very good friends, and so the atmosphere was electric. And Billy, waltz in for a sound check on sound check night, and he'd always come into the kitchen and say hello to us and stir the pot. And it was just a classic. He'd say, "What have we got here?" And he'd put a spoon in, and I'd say, "What do you think?" And a little bit more salt. So it was a great time. Big foodie, Billy Joel.
Yeah. What were you cooking up for him then?
Oh, lots of Italian. He loved his Italian food, and but again, cuisine destinations was it really important. It was the basis of a day where if we had 4 and 5 shows or 6 shows, or sometimes Neil Diamond with so many shows was like show after show after show. Dire Straits did 12 shows. I mean, we did Jesus Christ Superstar with Farnham and Sobrano and John Stevens and John Waters, and all those guys. We fed them, week after week with this phenomenal amount of shows. So if you just had the same old, fare every night, it would become quite boring for them. So we would say, hey, okay, do a list. And so we had to go out and, we'd research food, and I became quite proficient at lots of different cuisines, and they'd throw, how about some Moroccan one night? So you just go, okay, we're going to Morocco tonight. So into the cookbooks we get, and sort of delve in to try and learn some new dishes, and we pulled out everything out of the hat, and had a ball going into different cuisines and took them to a different country every night.
More than a morsel catering, I mean, what was your favourite tour that you ever did, like in that time?
God, I don't know whether I could ever have a favourite tour. I guess it was a lot of the times it depended on the team that I had, and I mean I was lucky in those days. I grew an incredibly talented team of hardworking rock and rollers, and it wouldn't happen today. I don't think the work ethic has just changed quite rapidly, and number one, it probably wasn't the best for health issues either. I mean, we worked long hours and long days and didn't have much sleep in those days. So I guess it was never to be repeated, I suppose, of a decade of in those the 90s that we did that for. The memories are there, and the runs got on the board for how many people we used to feed. I mean, Eastern Creek was an unbelievable feat, and I guess that was one of my favourites ever shows or catering experiences. Not that it was, it wasn't easy, and that's what probably made it even more special. As it was one of the most difficult ones because the whole site had to be built out there for that Guns N' Roses gig at Eastern Creek, and they used that same site 3 or 4 times after for other acts like Jimmy Barnes and Pearl Jam, I think, did something, and Kiss. There was quite a few other sites doing those sort of greenfield efforts and feeding 300, 400 people a day from just trestles, tables, and gas burners and woks, and it was a feat in itself. Hot as all hell out there. I think the temperatures got up to 36, 38 some days, and it was just sweating our bums off. I remember another time when we came to the Newcastle showgrounds and used the Newcastle showgrounds, and I think we loaded out our little tiny van threw in road cases and things and chock-a-blocked it out of 5 sellout shows for Midnight Oil at the entertainment centre, and then overnight at 1 o'clock in the morning we drove to Newcastle and set up at 3 o'clock and was ready for a breakfast for the Jimmy Barnes and Stray Cats show at 6 o'clock for breakfast for the crew. And we had to completely clean a burger, the fast food outlet that hadn't been used for 2 years probably. So there was dust. We had to hose it out and then still had breakfast on the table at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was all those challenges that I remember, that some with more fond memories than others, but others just said we did that, and with all the crew that I did it with, and they know who they are out there, and everybody's got great memories. Rock and roll is it makes the world go round.
Of course, after More Than a Morsel Catering, around 2000, you started on the journey of opening up your own restaurants, and in 2009, you opened one in Newcastle, New Lambton. Take me through what made you pick Newcastle?
Well, yeah, there's a good story with that too. There's a gentleman out there, his name's Andy, and he gave me a call. He was working for the then owners of the place. They had the people that we bought the theatre from, Robert and Tina Benson English, they had the vision way back when they first purchased the theatre as a picture theatre, and then put into council, and they changed it into the dinner show venue that it is today. Through all of that, the earthquake came. They had to rebuild it or refix it up, and after the earthquake came, and so they opened it as a beautiful cabaret style dinner show venue. When they laid their hat and they said they had enough after 20 years, they rented it out to several operators after that all sort of crashed and burned. And so this one guy who was working for them at the time had heard about my Kincumber restaurant and said, Brian, he said, you got to come up and see this place. They don't know what they're doing, and they really need help. Do you mind, coming up and helping them? I said, well, it's not really something that I just come and help someone do something. It's like not really my thing. So I kind of put it to the side, and then they crashed and burned again. And then several times people kept ringing me saying, there's this place in Newcastle. I said, all right, I'm going to go up and see it. So I eventually drove up and saw it, said, oh my God, this place needs a bit of a fix up. But I could see the potential. Anyway, long story, finally looked at it and then did a great deal with the owner to sort of buy later, rent now, buy later. And we did that. After a year, we purchased the theatre, and we've had it for 15 years now. So we built that, theatre up. We had a run of 3 restaurants, one in Newcastle, one in Kincumber, and then after the Newcastle one, about a year and a half, 2 years later again, I opened a third in DY. So it created a run for the artist. It seemed like it was the right thing to do. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. Running and going up and down the freeway for 5 years. Some days I'd open and I'd wake up in Kincumber, drive to Newcastle, put on a show, greet everybody and say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dragon. and then get in the car and then drive all the way to DY and close the show for Jimmy Barnes down there. So it was full on times, and I've had to slow down a little bit, which is what I really want to do. So
with Lizotte's New Lambton, I mean, I've been there many times, and there's a magic to it, Brian. And I mean, like, how did you create the magic? Like, it's just the atmosphere. Like, I don't know. There's just something magical about it. Like, what do you think? How did you do it? Yeah.
How do I do? Well, it's a combination of the venue to start off with. I mean, it's been looking after social life for over 100 years, so it's a 115-year-old theatre. So when you start with bones like that, you can't really go wrong if you keep that. We've had to upkeep it and make sure that it stays good. I mean, she's an old building; she'll need TLC for the rest of her days, and evermore to keep her going. So we tried to do that, and having the other two venues closed, so we had all of that memorabilia and the instruments and everything. I mean, I had a lot of fun doing that. A lot of days on eBay and a lot of secondhand stores and a lot of people dropping things off and creating and there's not much wall space left up there, that's for sure. After we'd taken it all from a different restaurant, so it's an amalgamation of so many memories for people. And I guess I always say we don't sell food and drinks and tickets. We sell memories, and that's what people come. They want to reminisce. They want to hear new music. But a lot more of the time that people are coming to relive memories that music brings back to them.
I think everyone knows now that, like, you've been looking for a buyer for the restaurant for quite a while. Like, are you still looking for a buyer? Like, what are your plans there?
Yeah, we're getting, we do have some interested parties, and so we're in negotiation. So it could be a change in the wind, and passing the energy on. And obviously we'll set them up and to go forward. But the venue deserves to live on, and people's lives and social lives in Newcastle have been looked after for a long time by this place, and hopefully they will continue that for years to come. And the legacy, because I really want to see the legacy go on. And so that was my main concern, was to make sure that we passed it on to some new operators that had the same vision of wanting to keep the place going as is.
Well, in saying that, what's next for you, Brian? Like, yeah.
And what's next? Well, I'd like to think that I'm not finished completely. I mean, I might get a job out of it. I might get a job out of it, booking the acts or something, or having something to do with that side of it. My major focus for the first year or so will definitely be spending more time with my family and my grandchildren. I've got 6 grandchildren now. I would love to spend time with them, do some traveling. Recently, or not so recently, but recently upgraded and bought a beautiful motorhome that's ready to go and do some miles in. And I'd love to see more of this country. Just be a punter, go to these festivals like Birdsville and Monday, and go and enjoy some music and go and sit front of stage instead of backstage, and be a punter. Yeah, there's a lot more on the horizon, and you never know. You might see me pop up somewhere, but it probably won't be working, as hard as I have done. I have visions of putting my feet up a little bit.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for your time today, and just thanks for making the time. Yeah,
it's been an absolute pleasure, Jack. Thank you for your interest in what I've done, and yes, I do understand. That the actual venue has brought so much joy to so many people for so many years, and not just the punters, but the musicians enjoy playing there, and it is an integral part of the community. So I appreciate your interest in it, and you putting it into a context where people can listen and enjoy my story. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was owner of Newcastle's very own Lizotte's restaurant, Brian Lizotte. To check out what's happening with Brian and Lizotte's Newcastle, head to lizottes.com.au. Remember to share this episode with other music fans, and if you really enjoyed this edition, let us know. Thank you for tuning into this edition of Vinyl Vibes, and to all you music lovers out there, you stay groovy now.